Let's travel back in fashion history, but not too far. Let's take a look at the current Y2K trend and what it was really like at the turn of the new millennium. Y2K stands for the year 2000, and this was the time when Justin and Britney were dating, Paris and Kim were friends, Diddy was called Puff Daddy, and the Beckhams were all over the news, and I was a teenager. In the late 1990s, there was kind of a revival of the 1970s with the bootcut jeans, the psychedelic prints, and the platform shoes. This was partly due to the Spice Girls. And do you also remember the super ugly Buffalo platform sneakers? Admit it if you had them. Towards the year 2000, everything shifted more towards the future, and this was also reflected in fashion. So there were more space-inspired designs, futuristic shapes, and also metallics, and this trend kept on until the early 2000s. And our influencers, the term didn't exist back then, were Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, or Christina Aguilera, to just name a few of them, and we took our inspiration from MTV and print magazines. The Y2K trend is experiencing a major revival at the moment thanks to Gen Zs who are flocking the thrift stores in search for garments or accessories from the time. Also, a lot of celebrities love the trend, for example Bella Hadid, Dua Lipa, or Rhianna. And what I would like to show you is what we as teenagers really wore at the time. Needless to say, the trends were set by celebrities, but also given that teenagers have a different budget than celebrities, I want to show how these trends were then reflected in our garments. I'm also looking at the time period between 1998 and 2005. This is how I define the Y2K trend. Some people define it a bit broader from 1995 to 2010, but I wanted to keep it simple for this video. Our interpretation of the Y2K trend felt edgy, it felt rebellious. It was bright colors with distressed denim, low-rise jeans, and it also reflected your kind of lifestyle or which group you belonged to. For example, there were people like me. I wore bootcut jeans, also low-rise, and unfortunately very often you could spot a G-string. This is a trend that I would like to delete from fashion history. Others wore cargo pants, also low-rise, paired with the boxer shorts that they usually stole from their boyfriends. This was more the hip-hop crowd. And just as a side note, I'm talking here about the German-speaking countries and Europe overall. So it might be a bit specific, but given that we were all connected through the same media and basically MTV, and also because of the influence of America on trends, I think there are many overlaps also in other countries. We wore these mesh tops over tank tops with thin straps. We called them spaghetti tops, and they were all a bit cropped. We wore them with the low-rise jeans. And also we loved prints on t-shirts. We wore layered t-shirts, sometimes also with slogans. And also we loved colorful eyeshadow or even colorful mascara, also glitter eyeshadow in different colors, glitter hair accessories, and also naturally body glitter on tan skin. The movies we watched were Coyote Ugly, Legally Blonde, Mean Girls, She's All That, 10 Things I Hate About You, American Pie, and we took inspiration from these movies. Those who could afford it got a tracksuit by Juicy Couture. This was an ugly trend predominantly started by Paris Hilton. Other fashion sins were Ed Hardy caps or t-shirts, micro skirts, or La Martina polo shirts. But now enough about the broad picture, let's dive into the details. Let's talk about the mesh tops that I've already mentioned. As I said, we wore them over tank tops and they came in different designs. They had to be cropped and we wore them either with jeans pants or skirts. And some iconic designs were, for example, this one by Jean-Paul Gaultier, but there were different interpretations, and celebrities like Britney Spears wore mesh tops for award ceremonies or on stage. And another big influence was when Jennifer Lopez wore the Versace jungle dress in 2000. And we wore these mesh tops to school, but also for parties. And in general, we didn't really differentiate too much between outfits for school or for going out, believe it or not. And we loved prints not only on mesh tops, but also on t-shirts, as you can see. And slogans were also a big thing. For example, in 2003, Sheryl Crow walked the red carpet in a t-shirt saying "War is not the answer," and we actually copied this t-shirt. Needless to say, Juicy Couture was also big when it came to t-shirts, but also, for example, Custo Barcelona was quite popular, which I'm wearing here. And believe it or not, these crazy prints were not limited to t-shirts only. I also had, for example, these graffiti style pants, which I love to wear with red diesel sneakers. It was kind of a style reference of Gwen Stefani at the time. I also had skirts with patterns like this. And I even had shoes with a crazy print. You can see a newspaper print here. This referenced the famous Galliano newspaper dress from his 2000 collection, which was also worn by Sarah Jessica Parker in Sex and the City. In addition to prints, cutouts were really popular as well. I had tops with cutouts on the shoulder, on the sides, or even in front. And Christina Aguilera's cutout dress was all over the news at the time. I do have to mention the crop tops here. The definition of cropped depended on the person. There was the longer version, which ended just above the belly button, but there was also the shorter version, which was basically just a bralette. I have to say I never really felt comfortable with this very short version of the crop top because we wore low-rise jeans, not like today the high-waisted version, so a big part of the body was exposed, and you can see already the longer version of this crop top was already quite short. There were celebrities like Paris Hilton or Christina Aguilera who popularized this trend of the really short crop tops, but I have to say in real life not many people really wore that. Today this iconic Christina Aguilera wrapped top also goes through kind of a revival because brands like Balenciaga released copies of it, so I'm curious if this trend is really going to take off. Let's move on to the next trend, denim. As I mentioned before, denim was all the rage. We wore denim all the time in blue tones, but also in black, or as you can see in white here. And it was not only about jeans, the pants, it was also about skirts, jeans jackets, even jeans accessories like bags, for example. And sometimes we even had outfits that had a jeans print on them, but the material was actually something completely different. One of the most iconic pictures of the time was Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake in an, let's call it, a denim ensemble. She herself described it as tacky in her book. I leave it up to you to judge it, but at the time this was all over the newspapers. And another person who really loved denim was Victoria Beckham. She not only wore denim, but she also had a collaboration with Rock & Republic for Victoria Beckham jeans. With the signature crowns in the back, and this was basically her start into the fashion industry and towards her own label. And one thing which I mentioned before already, which is closely linked to the denim trend, is the low-rise trend, because it was not only for the jeans that had to be low-rise, but also the skirts. So we ended up wearing not mini skirts, but micro skirts. You will see that a bit later. And as I mentioned in the introduction, it reflected kind of the lifestyle or the group you belong to. I wore bootcut jeans with my beloved Superstars by Adidas. Unfortunately, I gave those away, and I would have never thought that white sneakers would ever become popular again. And as I mentioned before, other people wore the cargo pants, also low-rise with the boxer shorts, and those pants were usually by the skater brands such as Dickies or South Pole. Let's move on to the next trend, glitter, glitter, glitter. You could not escape it. It was everywhere, on clothes, accessories, even on our bodies. And we had body glitter, which was basically a transparent lotion with glitter particles, which we put on before we went out. And another trend which was popularized by Paris Hilton and her friends was ultra tanned skin. Some people tanned naturally in the sun, others used tanning studios or even these self-tanning lotions, which gave them the signature orange skin. Thankfully, I stayed away from this trend. I was never really into this overly tanned skin. As I mentioned before, glitter was everywhere on dresses, shirts, accessories, and also hair accessories. We had glitter hairpins, but also these small glitter butterfly hair clips. They were really popular. Another big thing was glitter belts in various shapes and sizes. Some were broader and they were all over with glitter. Others were just basically strings of rhinestones, so this was another major accessory trend as well. Another trend I really liked was glitter and some other decor on jeans, as you can see here. This was popularized by Destiny's Child, the former band of Beyoncé, and I actually tried to make my own glitter jeans, but I was not really successful, so I ended up buying a pair of these glitter decorated jeans. And I would like to draw your attention to a very small detail in this Destiny's Child picture. As you can see, all these shoes were very pointy, And this was a major trend. We had pumps, mules, and also boots like this one that were really pointy. And the trend was that you wore the bootleg jeans, for example, that were really long and they covered the majority of the shoe, so you could only see the small part here. Another trend, micro skirts. These skirts were not mini, they were really micro, and one of the most iconic pictures was probably Giselle Bündchen when she picked up an award in a black micro skirt, a glitter belt and a white button-down shirt paired with like a bikini top. So this is still a picture that I have in my mind from these Y2K trends. And as you can see here, a lot of these skirts, they came with these flares as well. So this was also another major trend. And sometimes these micro skirts also came in tweed. This is not so much a reference to Gabrielle Chanel. This is more a reference to the movie Clueless, where the main character Cher loved these uniforms with the ultra short skirts from different materials. And it is also a reference to one of the most iconic music videos of the time. You probably know which one I'm talking about. It's Britney Spears' Baby One More Time, where she wears the school uniform. So of course this was also reflected in our clothes as teenagers. And there was also kind of a sub-trend to this school uniform trend. I would say it was this preppy look, popularized by brands like Ralph Lauren or Tommy Hilfiger. A lot of people loved wearing polo shirts, sometimes paired with pearl earrings, and then because it was also a logomania, the logo belts by Gucci or Louis Vuitton. And one brand that actually disappeared after the 2000s was La Martina. It was also very popular, actually quite expensive, and a lot of people wore the short-sleeved or long-sleeved polo shirts by the brand. As you may have noticed by now, we did not shy away from bright colors. Needless to say, the grunge look from the early 1990s was still popular. Some people preferred to wear only black, for example, but bright colors were really popular. This was not only due to the movie Clueless, but more so because of Legally Blonde and the bright pink that Reese Witherspoon was wearing. And this brightly colored top leads me to the next major trend, exoticism. As I mentioned in my previous video about Karl Lagerfeld's Orientalism, Asia has always been a major source of inspiration for many artists and designers in Europe, and especially in the early 2000s, China and India were a big source of inspiration. You saw designs on the runway, for example, by Jean-Paul Gaultier or Roberto Cavalli. At the same time, fast fashion retailers, of course, also jumped on the trend, and it was quite easy to find a Zipao-inspired top, for example, here in Europe. I also had one, and I also had a sari-inspired skirt, which was a bit similar to the one Gwen Stefani is wearing here in the picture. When you search online for Y2K, one trend that keeps coming up is lingerie. And this was basically fueled by people like Catherine Zeta-Jones, who wore slip dresses on the red carpet. So in general, the slip dresses were really popular, but a lot of them were inspired, or they should look like lingerie. I never really got into this trend, probably because I was a teenager and not really walking the red carpet, and it was nothing that you would wear in, let's say, real life, or your parents would allow to wear that to a party. I have seen it now, new interpretations on, for example, Hailey Bieber. I find it quite interesting that this trend seems to be coming back. And another really strange trend that I actually never really understood, even though I participated in that trend, was wearing the Union Jack or the American flag. It all started naturally with the Spice Girls when Jerry Halliwell was wearing the Union Jack dress, and a lot of us basically imitated it. And then of course it was also fueled by 9/11, when America was becoming more and more proud, and the American flag was basically omnipresent also on TV, in many TV shows. So it was not unusual that you would wear outfits incorporating either the Union Jack or the flag of America, which I today find really weird. I even have a passport picture where I have a silk scarf, the American flag around my neck, even though I'm Austrian. So I don't really understand why we all did this. I even saw a picture of Sarah Jessica Parker wearing a Union Jack outfit, which I also don't understand. So this is just something that we need to look at as a weird trend from the early 2000s. And let's now come to the last trend, the logomania. It was everywhere. Today I really despise logos, but unfortunately this has not always been the case, because the early 2000s were all about logos, and one of the most iconic products or accessories from the time is this Louis Vuitton pochette. designed together with Japanese artist Takashi Murakami. So you can imagine this bag, which is popular today. It was all the rage back then. Also his designs with the cherry flowers. And naturally also other brands capitalized on this trend, for example Gucci or Dior. For example, Gucci used its logo not only on clothes but also on accessories like belts with the Gucci logo as a canvas, but also in front, or also on its bag like this one. And also the shape of this bag was a very popular bag shape of the time. And this leads me to another signature shape, the saddlebag by Dior. It was particularly popular with the logo on it. So this was an iconic design which is also having kind of a revival today. And needless to say, Juicy Couture with the brand on t-shirts, for example, or even on the back of the tracksuits, this was very popular, but also other brands like Versace or Moschino used their logo and played with it. And because I'm talking about bags, I also need to show you this. This was the size of bags that we used to go out. It was micro bags. So if you think the Jacquemus bag is already small, this was really, really small. So you can see maybe our keys fit in there, a bit of cash and a lip gloss. And this trend was also due to the Louis Vuitton pochette, for example, or the mini Speedy that was also very popular with this canvas, the monogram canvas, the colorful one that I showed you before. And needless to say, we were teenagers, so we also had to go to school and carry a bag. So what did we use? We used either JanSport in different colors. I personally had a bright red Eastpak backpack. And on days where I didn't really want to carry my backpack, I had this bag. It's an Adidas bag and it's inspired by bowling bags, and this was another trend that many of the bags were actually inspired by bags from sports. And I would like to mention one last thing here to put this into context. This was the beginnings of the internet, also the beginnings of cell phones, and naturally cell phones became kind of a fashion accessory for us. Everything started with the Nokia phones where we could change the covers and the front. Later on, people had the Motorola flip phones, and I had a really funny one. It was a Siemens Xelibri phone, and when I took it out of my bag, people thought it was makeup because it looked like it also had a mirror inside, and I think this summarizes this Y2K trend really well. It was about colors, it was about technology, and it was also about fun. I hope you enjoyed this video. For me, it was a lot of fun doing this because it was kind of a trip down memory lane. And I'm really curious about you. What about you? Were you also a teenager at the time? Or are you interested in the current Y2K trend? Or do you have any questions that I could answer for you? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also don't forget to visit thepinklookbook.com for more fashion related articles. And also check out my fashion label Pelagona. Thank you very much for watching and see you soon.